Love is love. It's a phrase used often by the LGBTQ+ community to unite people under the same idea. It doesn't matter who you love or how you love is love. This is exactly what Hugh Nini and Neal Treadwell showcased in their book, Loving, a photographic history of men in love. It began with one photograph, found in an antique shop in Dallas, Texas, dated somewhere around 1920. It depicts two young men embracing and gazing at one another, clearly in love. Then a second photo came to them through an online auction, presented in a small Art Deco glass frame with "Yours always" etched into the glass. It shows two soldiers from the 1940s, posed cheek to cheek. None of the men in the photos were given the opportunity to be married to each other. For most of them, loving each other was a crime. Fast forward more than 100 years, these couples are being given the opportunity to be celebrated, not ridiculed. Today, we chat with Hugh and Neal all about how they started collecting photographs, their collecting parameters, and the unique stories they've come across since publishing Loving. I'm Levi Chambers, and this is Pride. Hugh and Neal have been together for nearly 3 decades. They both grew up in Texas, but while Neal embraced his southern roots and worked in the cattle industry, Hugh was pursuing something a bit more classical.
I've been a ballet dancer and ballet teacher for the last 40 years, maybe a little bit more, and currently on the faculty in New York here at Joffrey Ballet, and I coach privately as well.
After Neal spent some time working in the rodeo circuit, he decided to switch gears and pursue a career in the arts.
When I went to college, I went to work for a clothing store, and it was all couture clothing, which kind of changed my whole life, putting me in a different aspect of a world that propelled me, I guess, into cosmetics. Went into cosmetics in the, well, I guess I could say it, the mid 1980s. And fragrances, and then on through color. And my last positions with Bobbi Brown and Bare Essentials, I was over education, artistry globally for the companies.
One day, while wandering around an antique mall in Dallas, Texas, the couple discovered something that would change their lives forever.
So we were just killing some time that afternoon, and Neal came across a box with some random photographs in it, old photos.
We kind of separated when we were going through the antique mall, and this one booth I walked into, I found this box, as she was saying, and I'm flipping through it, and there were photos of homes that looked like our neighborhood in Dallas, which I thought was kind of great. But at the very back, there was a photograph of two guys that were embraced, one from behind the other, and just really sweet looks on their face. And so I went running through the antique mall to show Hugh, and we said, we got to have this. We got to, save it from, whatever's going to happen to it, or probably get thrown away. And so we went up to the checkout stand, and we put it at the bottom of the pile so that the person checking us out wouldn't see it, thinking that they might think it was as interesting as we did. And the guy just said $5, and we walked out. So that was probably the cheapest photo we've ever purchased in our life.
The photo was special to Neal and Hugh for a few reasons. One, it was amazing that a photo featuring two men so obviously in love would have been taken in the first place. And two, they felt so lucky that regardless of where the photo came from, it had somehow ended up in Texas for them to find.
We had never seen up until that point male relationships depicted in that way, romantically, two people who were in love with each other. Sexually, we've seen a lot of that. Historically, that's been well documented, but romantically, emotionally, no, we hadn't seen that before. We never expected to find a second one.
As luck would have it, Hugh and Neal discovered another photo just a few months later. Soon, 2 photos turned into 20, which turned into 200. But even with a growing collection, Hugh and Neal didn't see themselves as collectors.
We just thought we were finding things that needed to be preserved, how unlikely that they should, have lived this long, and we got to, put them in a safe or something like that, make sure they last beyond our lives if possible. We didn't tell any of our friends, any of our family, which were very close with both, that we were doing this. We were kind of embarrassed about it, honestly. There was never even a conversation between the two of us. So-and-so is coming over, we're going to visit family. Should we show them this album of photographs? Never a conversation. We just never did it, never talked about it. But about 13 years into it, we did start to understand that we had acquired something substantial, and that it felt too important for just the two of us to be looking at it. And so we started brainstorming ways to share the collection. We didn't want to throw it out on the internet because that's just not the way to do it. And eventually became a book.
Their book, Loving, A Photographic History of Men in Love, is a visual narrative that showcases unpublished photos of male partnerships taken during a time when these relationships were illegal.
At this point, I think we're at about 3,300. When we published the book, it was a few less than that. And in the book are 315 that were selected by us, our publisher, and the designers who put the book together for us.
Their collection isn't limited to just the United States. They have images from Australia, Bulgaria, Canada, Croatia, France, Japan, the UK. You name a place, they probably have a photo from there. But what do they look for in an image before it makes it into their collection?
We look for that unmistakable look of love in two guys' eyes. So therefore, it's not like we're looking at any specific class of people or any genre or any, whether they're in a uniform or anything else. Age doesn't matter. What we've collected is, just what we found out in the public.
And so our collecting parameter for us has always been that we need to, when we look into a photograph, sometimes the embrace or the kissing or something like that, it's a dead giveaway of what you're looking at. Sometimes it's more subtle.
In some photos, the chemistry between the two men is obvious. They might be kissing or embracing, which makes it very clear that they were in a romantic relationship. But if you see a photo in the collection and your first thought is, no way, these two, they're just good friends, you might want to go back and look one more time.
Sometimes it's two men standing side by side and one man has his foot on top of the other man's foot. And they have this funny look on their face, like, see if you can find it or whatever, or something like that. But so there are some subtle hints.
When Hugh says the couple has a funny look on their face, he's talking about love.
What will always appear in the photographs is this unmistakable look of love that people have on their faces when they fall in love with somebody. It's not a look that you can hide if you're feeling it, and it's not a look that you can manufacture if you're not feeling it. So we consider it to be genuine when we see it in a photograph, and that's what guides our collecting.
The photos that Hugh and Neal are collecting come from a very specific timeline, between the 1850s and the 1950s. But Hugh says within that timeline, there's a period where the men seem to be more careless and more affectionate than the rest.
There's some very outward displays of romantic love between the men that looks uninhibited in any way. And those photographs tend to fall between the 1890s and the 1920s. Not before that and not after that, but the displays of affection and romance and love are very outward and also often include family members or friends and allies.
You would think the photos would only get better, right? Men would become more and more comfortable in their sexuality as time went on. Nope, that's not the case.
What our collection has revealed to us is, we had the same thought in the beginning. These photographs are amazing because it was so much worse back then. Actually, that's not entirely true. I mean, it's much better today, but it's also much worse. Back then, they didn't have the anti-gay industrial complex that exists today and is well-funded, and people draw a paycheck every day for hating gay people. That's their job description, hate gay people, and work at it full-time. And there are lots of organizations that are fully committed to that. And it's a national campaign in the United States and around the world, and it's a national issue legally, socially, and so forth. That did not exist back then. So while it wasn't ideal to be in love with someone of the same gender back then, there was some tacit acceptance that was kind of like, well, live and let live. Maybe not always, but the collection reveals to us that that did exist. And this other thing did not exist. We know that because history.
After finding their first photo, Hugh and Neal continued to stumble upon these meaningful photographs everywhere they went.
My job in cosmetics took me traveling all over the United States. And if I were spending a weekend outside of Dallas or even in Dallas, I would go to that local antique store and just kind of walk around and see what they have. We also went to a couple of brocants or
brocants.
But here, there's 26th and 6th Street. There's an antique
here in New York.
Here in New York, because we're not in Texas.
Here, yeah.
But we would come up to New York, and they had just a little weekend of antiques out there, and there was one guy who only had photographs, and we found a couple in his stash that he had, but they were never labeled like, here's gay photos or here's...
His was, yeah, the box of gay photos would have everything
Well,
in it.
They were a little more explicit.
Yeah. But we got yours always there.
That's right, we
Yeah.
did. We collected a wonderful photo. It's of two soldiers in a glass frame, and etched on the glass says, yours always.
Yours always or always
Always
yours?
yours.
I can't remember. I don't recall right off the top of my head.
But it was doing that, and then going international and going to antique stores. And then there's some photography fairs that happen here in New York and in Dallas and abroad. And then we've connected with several people there. We have right now reached out to and connected with photography or photograph dealers from around the world, from Russia, Estonia.
Like 5 in Russia, 3 in Bulgaria, a couple in Serbia, a couple in Croatia, 1 in Estonia you mentioned, and then dotted around Europe.
Another criteria these photos have to go through before they make it into their love book is what Hugh and Neal call a 50-50 test.
When we look at the photograph, we have to believe that they're at least 50% likely to be in a romantic relationship. That being said, we have very few in the collection and 0 in the book. Well, we have 1 in the book, and there's a reason for it.
When they came across a photo of 2 soldiers smiling in uniform, there was nothing in their posture that screamed, "We're together."
But they had this look in their eyes that says, we're a couple and we're in love with each other, and so we got them because they weren't expensive.
When they brought the photo home, they ultimately decided that it didn't pass the 50-50 test, so it wasn't going to be included in the book. They actually ruled it as a 0%. But then, they found another photo of the same 2 men that confirmed their initial suspicion.
This was a couple that was in love with each other. There they are embracing in the Alps in Kitzbühel, Austria.
Both photos ended up in their book, which definitely plays off the whole "don't judge a book by its cover" phrase. But like many of the photos Hugh and Neal come across, they didn't know any more of the story until a German book ended up on their doorstep. When we come back, the tragic love story of 2 German royals and the gay American soldiers who almost saved their lives. Pride is supported by First Republic Bank. Now more than ever, First Republic's priority is serving their clients and communities. Their personalized banking solutions go deeper than a transaction. For more than 30 years, First Republic has striven to leave a positive impact on the communities they serve. From presenting grants to nonprofits in need, to going the extra mile to connect individuals experiencing hardship with fair loans, the bank is focused on doing the right thing. No matter what your financial goals are, your dedicated First Republic banker will be there to guide you every step of the way. Visit firstrepublic.com today to learn more. That's firstrepublic.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender. Welcome back. Today we're chatting with Hugh Nini and Neal Treadwell, the couple behind the book Loving, a photographic history of men in love from the 1850s to the 1950s. Before the break, Hugh and Neal introduced us to the faces of the soldiers featured on page 110 of their book. It was a memorable story for the collectors because they found not 1, but 2 images of the same couple. What are the odds? But what really set them apart from all the others is that Hugh and Neal had the opportunity to put names to the faces in the photos. When the president of Sotheby's in Germany read their book, he noticed something familiar about the 2 soldiers. He sent Hugh and Neal a note and a book that would help add some context to the photo. The book was called
Imlau. And Imlau is the hunting resort for the German royals, all the way from the 1860s to the mid 20th century. And he put 2 sticky notes inside.
So what did Hugh and Neal discover? Well, for one thing, the soldiers are from Texas. What are the odds of that?
One is from
Longview, Texas, and the other's from Dallas.
Dallas, right. And they fell in love during basic training at Camp Gruber in Oklahoma. They were then sent over to fight in Europe, and they fought all across Germany in the 42nd Infantry Division, which is named the
Rainbow Division.
How ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not for that reason, because it was way before the rainbow became the symbol, but it was named that because in this division there were men from all over the United States. Most divisions were from one city or one town or one specific area, but this was a collective across the United States.
And General Douglas MacArthur, who's famous, after World War I, named it the Rainbow Division because of what Neal just explained, because they were from all over the place. They were from everywhere, so Rainbow. And it was reconstituted in the 1940s to fight in World War II. So the Rainbow Division is actually very famous because it liberated Dachau concentration camp on April 29th, 1945. Their division had fought almost all the way across Germany, and they were approaching the town of Dachau. And two American reporters that were in the town at the time, and a civilian, intercepted the Rainbow Division, cut them off and said, "Don't go into the town, follow this road into the forest." And they did, and where they found the unspeakable horrors of Dachau concentration camp.
This concentration camp opened in southern Germany in 1933. It was initially intended to hold political prisoners, which is why 2 German royals were sent to the camp because of their homosexuality.
This was the German royalty was dethroned or pulled from power after World War I, but they still had their titles and so forth. And within that family were 2 men that were not related, but they were both German royals, and that's Prince Friedrich Leopold and Baron Fritz Cherini. And they are documented throughout this book as an openly gay couple. They are romantically linked from their late teens all the way up to when they were sent to Dachau concentration camp in 1944. So here's where they intersect with our soldiers from World War II, John W. Moore and Daryl. John and Daryl helped liberate Dachau concentration camp on August 29th, 1945. 5 days earlier, the prince, the baron, the prime minister of Austria, and other high-value prisoners were rounded up and driven out of the camp to be shot before a firing squad. So they missed the liberation by 5 days.
Hugh and Neal connected with John's nephew a few years ago, and from him, they learned more about what became of the soldiers after the war.
John and Daryl, we don't know what became of their relationship. What we do know is that before John returned home, he was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. He started to fall down. 2 years after World War II, in 1947 or 48, he was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And he tells us that his uncle, in his early 70s, asked him at some point, handed him a shoebox, didn't even say what was in it, and a ring, and said, "Please keep these safe for me." And we would paraphrase that to, "Please keep these safe after me." Because 2 years later, John passed away from his muscular dystrophy. He lived a lot longer than anyone expected him to. The nephew went off to college, met his wife, married. They raised 3 sons. And at some point within the last 10 years, he went, "I wonder what's in that shoebox," and opened it up. And there were all these pictures of his uncle and his uncle's boyfriend, his rainbow scarf for his dress uniform, and some documentation. I don't recall what they were, but we now have about 150 photos of John and Daryl and their intersection with Dachau concentration camp. There are photos of them there, and the liberation of Dachau, 5 days too late for the prince and the baron.
As for Daryl, Hugh says he got married and had 5 children. Then he became a court stenographer, and he did that for many years until he passed away in the early 2000s.
We don't know what became of their relationship, though.
I realize there's a lot of sadness in this story. So if you're looking for a light at the end of the tunnel, here it is.
Alan Berube wrote a wonderful book called Coming Out Under Fire. Alan Berube describes this is how the military dealt with gay soldiers during World War II and afterwards.
The book describes the 2 battles many LGBTQ+ soldiers were facing at the time of World War II. The first one being for their country, and the second being for their own survival as homosexuals against the military.
And one of the gay soldiers that they talk about in the book was sent to Dachau concentration camp after he was shot down over Italy. And he was liberated by John and Daryl's unit, the Rainbow Division.
In the mid-1800s, there were a few ways a couple could take a picture of themselves. Luckily, none of the methods were very expensive. The first method was to hire someone to take a tintype, which is
kind of like the Polaroid of the mid-1800s. And so this would give anyone the opportunity at a fair or
Sure.
at a circus, at church, the guy would come in, and actually the photographers were used in the Civil War. So that's where this happened, because you didn't have any film that could be destroyed. It was a piece of tin that had been coated with a substance. And then when it was opened up, the camera shutter was opened up, the image was transported onto the plate, and then they would go into the dark room and it would be processed there. So within 15 minutes, someone would walk away with a tintype photograph, and one of a kind, no trace of anything that someone could find out if there was a romantic glance or something in it. But it was very inexpensive. And then there was the photo booth that was very inexpensive as well. And so you would step into a photo booth, and not only were you the subject, but you were also the photographer and the processor, and you would walk away with your images there. So that was very inexpensive for someone. And then starting around the 1920s, photography became inexpensive, the paper type photography.
Because photos were inexpensive to take and usually came with a degree of secrecy, Hugh and Neal were able to include a wide range of social classes in their collection. But the same could not be said about race.
In the very, very beginning, when the book first launched, we had not a lot. The only bad reviews we got were mainly pertaining to the lack of diversity and people of color in the book. And while we certainly appreciate and understand the sentiment, we didn't do this on purpose, but our collection landed in the century between the 1850s and 1950s. So start there. It's in the U.S., and the U.S. still has a terrible problem with racism. It started out with slavery, which is an abomination. And so the people of color didn't have a lot of access to anything in the United States during that century. They didn't have access to education. They didn't have access to, good stores or the vote. And now we're seeing that all again. So unfortunately, the period that our collection covers, it's very discriminatory and excluded people of color broadly. We've collected every single photo of an African-American couple or an interracial couple that we've come across for 21 years now. And out of 3,300 photographs, that number's about 10 or 11 or 12 or something like that. It's very few. The photos just aren't out there. We'd have them if they were. And like I said, we've collected all that we've come across.
It was around the 1900s when photography studios began to pop up around the US. Young men would shave, comb their hair, and put on the nicest suit they owned in order to come in and have their photos taken.
And then at the end, there would be this prop that says, "Not married, but willing to be," which means, "Hey, ladies, I'm not married, but I'm willing to be married to you ladies."
It was kind of like their way of creating a profile on a dating app. They were saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a wife. Here's what I got to offer."
So this young couple, they look like they're in their teens, late teens probably, had the self-awareness to be photographed together as a couple, and then to go a step so much further than anybody was thinking during that time and hold up that prop that was for a single man, hold it together, and say, "We're not married to each other, but we're willing to be."
The photo was taken 100 years before the first same-sex wedding ceremony would take place, and decades before conversations even started around the topic. Talk about woke.
And they had the prescience and the self-awareness to think of themselves in terms of being a married couple, which I think is absolutely astonishing. And this photograph is sort of becoming the iconic image of the book and possibly of the entire collection.
The last photo that made it into Hugh and Neal's favorites from the collection uncovered a relationship between two famous artists.
It's a beautiful photograph. It actually looks like Bruce Weber could have taken it. And it's just gorgeous. And this one, what makes it special, it's the artistic layout of it and everything. And to think that, this was a novice taking this photograph. It was, a friend of theirs, but it's just the way it's cropped and everything going on in the photograph makes it a piece of art.
The Guardian in the UK published a feature on Hugh and Neal's book. Just like the photo of the two soldiers, someone recognized the faces in the portrait after reading the article from The Guardian. So they reached out.
So, they reached out to us. We're like, absolutely, give him our information. We'll talk to him. And he identified the two guys, the one handsome guy on top with all the hair as Rupert Brooke, who is a famous poet. And the one below him is Duncan Grant, who is a famous artist, both from the UK. And if it's not them, it's their twin. You can see the one's ear, you can see Rupert Brooke's ear, and it matches perfectly, and it's spot on. We've had two people since then email us and say the same thing.
What's interesting about it is, number one, the beautiful romanticism between the two of them is just really out there. And the second thing is, this is before either of them was famous. They're very young in this photograph. They're not the famous poet or the famous artist. They're just two guys. And they belong to the Bloomsbury Group, which was an artist colony during that time and up through fairly recently, I think, it existed. And so,
which means there could be a very famous photographer who actually did take the photo that was in the group.
When Hugh and Neal decided to transform their side project into a book, they had no idea the impact it would have.
We hoped 5,000 people would like the book, and what's happened since the launch of the book was just so much greater, so much bigger than anything the two of us could have possibly imagined. We've come to understand our collection and its message better from publishing it than we did before we published it, although I think we had a pretty good grasp that it needed to be out there somehow. But the response has been just off the charts.
Whether it's through someone reaching out to us on Instagram or Facebook or sending us an email, talking about what the book means to them and who they've given it to. And we did a limited edition where people could dedicate the book to someone of the top first 1,000. And we found that there were mothers and fathers buying it for their kids buying it for their parents, grandparents buying it for their grandson and for his engagement, and we would write little notes for them. We had a few people in their 70s that reached out to us and said, if only I had this book when I was growing up to show that I could have had that love, and I hope it's not too late for me. Sorry. It's still the emails and everything we get, they're very personal and extremely
intimate
and just pull at your heartstrings. And so we've kept them all because that's a story within itself on what this book has meant to so many people. Because we've had as many straight people purchase it as gay people. In fact, in the beginning, there were more straight people that purchased it because that it's two men, it's secondary. The message is about love. And when they see it and they go through it, I showed it to my little brother who's married, has two kids. And the minute he saw it, he's like, oh my God, that's love. I mean, he just kind of screamed it out, and people just share that message.
Throughout all of this, finding that photo, finding all of the other photos tucked in nooks and crannies and, secondhand stores and online and auctions, what did you learn about love and the meaning of love throughout this process?
That it's universal. The love between two men is the same between two women, a man and a woman. We all feel it the same way.
Yeah, it's male couples feel the same love that male and female couples feel, and female couples feel the same love that everybody else feels. It's the same love. And we go one step further to say this: love doesn't have a sexual orientation. It isn't experienced differently by people of different sexual orientations. It's experienced the same way by all. It confirmed our understanding of our collection that this is universal, and everybody that sees it understands it for what it is, and are really moved by it because we've never been depicted this way before. And by we, I say, male couples who are in love with each other. We go out of our way not to describe the subjects as gay or homosexual. We don't have those pictures. We have pictures of two people who are in love with each other.
After seeing the effect of their collection with their first book, Hugh and Neal are already planning on releasing another book. I mean, they have the photos at home to make it, so why not?
We're planning on doing one. It's going to be Loving the Military Edition, or Loving Men in Uniform, because of around 20-25% of our collection is men in uniform from around the world, wars that the U.S. fought in, didn't fight in, from the Civil War up through
The American Civil War.
Yeah, American Civil War up through 1950. That's our cutoff, and then we'll go from there. I mean, there's opportunities for other books if there's still interest after that, but we're hoping that this book will launch in 2022 in October, which would be 2 years from the launch of this one, because we just hit our going into our 5th printing on this, and it's in 5 languages.
If you're looking to pick up a copy of Hugh and Neal's book, which you definitely should, here's where to go.
Well, there's 2 kinds of copies, and the limited, signed, numbered, dedicated, limited edition, 1 through 1,000. There are only 12 of those left, and that's at loving1000.org. There's only 12 out of the 1,000. Then I'll let you do this part.
Sure. You can also get a signed retail edition at the same email address. We've started selling on the website at loving1000.org. And then, we always like to say buy local when you can. Our book is in many independent bookstores around the world. And then we're in some of the larger chains as well. And then the big boy, Amazon.
If all else fails, go to Amazon, but we do try to encourage people to support their local bookstores. Although Barnes & Noble is always out of stock.
It's just probably a good sign.
Yes.
They're definitely not sitting on inventory.
Pride is a production of Straw Hut Media. If you like the show, leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Then follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter @Pride, and tune in weekly for new episodes. Be sure to share this episode with your friends and subscribe for more stories from amazing queer people. If you'd like to connect with me, you can follow me everywhere @Levi Chambers. Pride is produced by me, Levi Chambers, Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, Caitlin McDaniel, and Brandon Marlowe. Edited by Silvana Alcala and Daniel Ferreira. Sound mixing by Silvana Alcala.
When we made this book, we probably had around 2,700 photographs. Now we have over 3,300. There is a second book that is possibly in the making.
It is.
It sounds like you're about 1,000 photos in.
Straw Hut Media.